Greetings, Cliff Goldstein here, and I want to welcome you to Contending for the Faith. This is part of a series I'm doing on the questions of faith and science. And that's because we live in a world where these two forces, faith and science, are really very prevalent. In fact, even if we don't have faith, well, actually, we all have faith. Even if you don't have faith in what is deemed traditional religious faith, you still have faith in whatever you believe. And that's because of the nature of knowledge, or should I say belief itself. See, look, we are beings who are greatly limited in our understanding of whatever we believe or know or think that we know. There are some very powerful, and as far as I know, impenetrable barriers on our knowledge, on our beliefs about anything and everything. You could believe something, believe in it strongly. In fact, you could say you are certain of it. And indeed, you could have some very, very good reasons, some valid reasons for believing it's true. And it very well might be. But the fact is, there's always going to be some contingency to your beliefs. There is always going to be a bit of a gray area, a place where doubt can come in, where some questions can come in, which means that no matter how sure you are of something, someone else could point out reasons why you might be wrong. This is just a basic fact of our knowledge, which is why I say that everyone, even atheists, especially atheists, I think, have to have faith. And I mean, to make the statement that no God exists is as much of a faith statement as the statement that God does exist. Now, the atheist might have what he or she believes is some very good reasons for their faith, okay? I mean, they are some pretty smart atheists who can give some pretty good arguments for their belief. It's the same with those who believe in God. They can give some pretty good arguments for their beliefs as well. But in the end, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, there is still some degree of belief. Your belief is still to some degree a faith statement. And that's no really big deal, because I'm trying to say pretty much that all we believe, everything we believe, we have to take to some degree on faith. Hence, faith is a big part of our life. And so is science. And in fact, there's a lot more faith in the process of science than most people realize. Hence, the title of this series, Faith in Science. It just doesn't mean someone outside of science having faith in it. It also means those in the field of science needing to work by faith as well. Anyway, in this series, I look at science and some of the issues in science and seek to explore what science does, what it cannot do, what it claims to do, and what it claims to teach us and to reveal to us about the world. And I also want to look as to how should we as religious people respond to those claims, some of those claims of what science makes for itself. Now, I emphasize the word religious because that's an adjective to let us know the kind of faith I'm talking about here specifically. Because believe me, there are a lot of different kinds of faith out there, contrary to what some would have us believe. I can still remember Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. And I can remember him writing that science is based on facts and reason and evidence and proof, while religion is based, he said, just on faith. Well, of course, if anyone is confronted with a choice presented in terms like that, which one are they going to choose, okay? But the fact is that Dawkins' characterization is really a caricature of what the real issues are. And we'll deal with this for more in the future, for sure. Anyway, for now, there is this belief now that science is kind of this higher form of knowledge Someone once described it as the sacral mode of knowledge, and that it pretty much trumps any other kind of beliefs you have. Okay, in other words, if you believe in X, doesn't really matter what X is, okay, or how you came to believe in X. You believe in X, and you think you have good reasons for believing in X, and you really might have good reasons for it. However, someone comes along with the latest and greatest data based on laboratory experiments and other things done according to what has been called the scientific method and the scientific model, and that person says to you that X is false, and we have proved it false in science, then you have no choice, do you? Any rational person must renounce his or her belief in X. After all, we have science, scientific evidence showing that your belief in X is wrong. In many ways, there's a strong current for this type of thinking in our society today. And you know, it's really, to a certain degree, it's understandable. And in some cases, it might even be justifiable. Your belief in X might really be misguided. And science comes along to show you that it is. That's fine. But I want to look at the question. Why should we believe what science tells us? Or do we have good reasons at times to question it, even on things that science often declares as certain? I want you to listen to this quote from someone who has been a very well-known and very influential thinker in the previous century. His name is Alfred North Whitehead. Listen to this quote. 57 years ago it was, when I was a young man at the University of Cambridge. I was taught science and mathematics by brilliant men, and I did well in them. Since the turn of the century, I have lived to see every one of the basic assumptions of both set aside. And yet, in the face of that, the discoverers of the new hypotheses in science are declaring, now, at last, we have certitude. Whoa, that to me is very, very heavy. Something to really give you something to think about, especially as we confront the idea that if we have a belief, but science comes along and teaches something contrary to it, then we have to by default just give up that belief. And I want to look at one particular thing regarding the nature of science and what it says to us and whether we should accept it or not. Have you ever heard the argument, well, science works? I mean, how can we question what science is doing? How can we question that science is doing anything other than giving us truth about what's out there when it worked so well? If we wanted to go to the moon, okay, and we got to the moon, and the science is science, and scientists got us to the moon, then how can the science be wrong? Fill in the blanks. I wanted to build a smartphone. Okay, and so we asked science to build us a smartphone, and we got a smartphone. How could it be wrong? We wanted to build a nuke, and we asked science to help us to build a nuke, and lo and behold, when they dropped little boy over Hiroshima, coincidence of coincidence, it just happened to explode, just as science told us. Thus, the question is, how could science be wrong? Thus, if we believe X, and science tells us belief in X is wrong, how dare we challenge it? One Christian theologian, and of all people, a Christian theologian you'd think wouldn't be so gullible, but he once said, Christians who fly through the heavens in planes and speed along the earth in cars, who watch television and use electric razors, cannot fairly repudiate the conclusions of science. Really now? Because science allows us to fly planes and use electric razors, that because it bears practical fruit, now it's the ultimate arbiter of truth? Well, in one level that sounds all right, but I want you to look at it. We're going to look at this a little more closely. Have you ever seen the movie Apollo 13? about the Apollo 13, that was crippled spacecraft going to the moon. I remember the reality of it very well. An attempt to get it back to the Earth with the astronauts in one piece. Well, there's this great scene when the head of NASA, played by Ed Harris, he stands in front of a group of people, co-workers, and he's got a chalkboard up there, and he's got a crude drawing of the Earth and the moon, and he has a crude drawing of the Apollo spacecraft. And basically what he said that they were going to do is he said they were going to have the spacecraft circle behind the moon and let the gravity of the moon catch the spacecraft and zing, ricochet it back to Earth. And you know what? That's what they did. And you know what's even more amazing? Hey, folks, it worked. Now, they were using, at that point, they were using pure Newtonian physics. The physics that Newton developed as a young man in the 1600s. You know, if somehow they could have transported Newton from the 1600s and brought him into that room, sat him down with a sheet of paper and a pencil, and given Newton a few variables, in probably 10 minutes, Sir Isaac could have told them, given them the computations, and told them exactly what they needed to do in order to get the spacecraft back. Okay, talk about wonders of wonders. I mean, how can we refute this? After all, it worked. Therefore, ergo, it must be true. This, my friends, is one of the grand fallacies and misconceptions that people have about science. For starters, let's go back and look at the Newton thing again. For starters, Isaac Newton didn't have any clue what gravity was. He says, I feign no hypotheses. He had no idea what gravity was or why these objects would attract each other with the force that they do proportional to their distances and their mass. He had no idea why. In fact, he even said that the idea that two forces being able to attract each other like this, he said, was so absurd he didn't know why anybody would believe it. Now, Newton was talking about his own theory, so he had no idea what it was. Secondly, Newton developed his theory based on two premises, both of which have been now shown to be false. He based his theory on the concept of absolute time and absolute space, and they were both shown to be wrong. Finally, linked to this last point, Newton's theory, while I wouldn't say it has been overturned, it has been superseded by Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. Now, what does this mean? Well, we often hail Newton's work on the law of gravity as a classic account of how science reveals truth to us. And yet what? Newton had no clue as to what gravity was, no clue as to how it worked. He built his premises on he built his theory on false premises, and the theory worked only in certain circumstances, and in many ways, the foundation of the whole theory has been superseded by something else. This is finding truth. All Newton's theory did was make predictions. Now, if that's all you think that science is for, and some people do think that, then this is fine. It was a smashing success, at least within certain speed limits. But this brings up a very crucial misconception about science, and it has to do with what I talked about earlier. Just because science works, quote unquote, just because we can use it to make accurate predictions about the world, just because we can use it to make electric razors or smartphones, doesn't mean that our understanding of it is complete or even correct. That theologian who said because science works, we just can't dismiss it, doesn't understand some of the severe limits on science. Let me give you another example. Let's take the Ptolemaic view of the cosmos, which for 1,300 years dominated Western thought. This is the idea that the Earth sat at the center of the universe, and all the stars and all the planets and everything circled the Earth in orbited the Earth in perfect circles. This belief goes back long even before then. Aristotle taught it, and it was believed in the Western world for centuries. Okay? But guess what, folks? It worked. It worked. If you wanted to sail your ship from Lisbon to Venice, it would get you there. If you wanted to predict what some stars would be doing in 6 months, the Ptolemaic worldview enabled you to do just that, even though, come on, it was completely radically wrong. I mean, a theory that posited a stationary Earth, wrong. Sitting at the center of the universe, wrong. With everything orbiting it in perfect spheres, perfect circles, wrong. Still enabled people to make accurate predictions and enabled you to sail your ship from Lisbon to Venice. That's about as wrong as arguing for a flat Earth. But you know, and I haven't looked into it, but I think it would be kind of fun. What kind of accurate predictions could somebody make about the Earth and what goes on here on the Earth from a flat Earth perspective? I'd be willing to bet that you could build a system of predictions, interpretations based on a flat Earth that would probably bear a certain amount of practical fruit. Anyway, the point is that to some degree it would work. But can you see my point here? Just because something works in science, just because it makes predictions, accurate predictions, just because something of a practical value can be cashed out of it, doesn't necessarily mean the science behind it is correct. It might be, and in some cases it probably is, but as we've seen, it always doesn't have to be. We are impressed by science, and rightly so, because science really does give us some incredible technology, and we can see how well it works, okay? But that's no guarantee that the theory is correct. It might be right, and we maybe have great reasons other than its mere accuracy to believe it's right, but it might not be. Let me give you an example right now right in the forefront of science and technology today. General relativity and quantum theory are two of the most powerful scientific concepts, and they have been verified over and over and over in the 20th century, especially quantum theory. I've heard it said that quantum theory can make predictions so accurate, it's like comparing a human hair to the width of the continental United States. That's how accurate it is. And not only do we use quantum theory in our cell phones, we use general relativity in our GPSs. In other words, these theories not only make accurate predictions, but they bear very fruitful technology. My cell phone, my iPhone, uses quantum theory and general relativity. Now, let me read you a quote from physicist Brian Greene in his book, The Elegant Universe. He talks about these theories, and he says they're almost unimaginable accuracy. Virtually all predictions made by these theories have been correct. Okay, so they're making amazingly accurate predictions. Okay, just like Newton's gravity made some pretty good predictions. But then listen to what he writes. As they are currently formulated, general relativity and quantum theory cannot both be right. The two theories underlining the tremendous progress of physics during the last 100 years are mutually incompatible. Whoa, that's heavy. We have two of the most successful scientific theories that have given us incredible technology, and yet what? They are in places incompatible. If one is true, the other can't be. They both can't be right, but how can one of them be wrong? And how could any of them be wrong if they give us such accurate predictions and give us such powerful technology? See, don't miss the deeper point here. Two of the premier theories of science, two of what are considered the 20th century's greatest scientific achievements, and yet what? Something is seriously wrong with our understanding of either one of them or both of them. I find that fascinating. They work, they give us predictions, and yet we know that there's something wrong there. If you are interested, there's a great series of lectures from a place called the Teaching Company, called Science Wars by Dr. Stephen Goldman. And if you're interested in this, he does these great series of lectures on this. But one of the fascinating things is he talked about in the 1800s, there were great technical rewards were coming from science. They were building all sorts of widgets and all sorts of devices based on this science that they had in the 1800s. The only problem was, by the 1900s, almost all those scientific theories were being overturned. In other words, they were said to them, you're making a great widget based on a theory, but they're being told, oh, by the way, the theory you have used to make that widget, we now know is wrong. Thus, the practical gains from science prove only that we understand the science well enough, to get practical gains from it. Those gains prove nothing about the absolute correctness of the science itself. A theory can make great predictions and even give us fruitful technology and still not be giving us an accurate depiction of reality. This leads to something that has been greatly and hotly contested among scientists from a couple hundred years, and they're still debating it today. And look, the idea is very simple. In the 1800s, there was a big debate over the nature of heat. What is heat? People came up with different ideas of heat, some Philosophian theory, the caloric theory. Well, in 1822, a Frenchman came along and wrote a book called The Analytical Theory of Heat. And the bottom line is he said, it doesn't matter what heat is. Forget about what heat is. All that matters is just, can we make predictions? Can we use it to do what we want to do? Don't worry about what it is. And see, this gets to a big debate in the whole question of science, of what science is. One group is out there that science is there to tell us how the world really is. It's out there to teach us truth. If that's true, though, then as we saw, Newton's famous laws of gravity, Newton's famous law that we all learned, if that's what science is supposed to do, then Newton's theory failed completely. On the other hand, others say, please, science does not and cannot tell us what's really out there. They can't tell us what is truth. That's nonsense. All science could do is help us make predictions about the world and how it works. If it tells you that you have X, and if you do such and such X, you get Y. If you have X and you bring Y to it, you will get Z. That's all it can do, period. It can tell us what, but it can't tell us why, at least not in any absolute sense. So right off the bat here, we see that science, even something as successful as Newton's law of gravity, which allows us to make incredible predictions, isn't really quite cut out, isn't really quite everything that we're led to believe it was. And it's fascinating that on so basic a question as to what science does, at a very foundational level, there's a great debate among scientists and philosophers of scientists themselves. They don't even agree on what science really does. And trust me, this is only one of the many unsolved debates like this that remain in this whole area today. Does science really tell us about the world? Does it really tell us truth? Or does it simply tell us how the world acts, what it does under such and such conditions? These are two very different things, too. Now, I want to be careful here. I don't want to go too far the other way. And you get into this radical postmodernism and this whole idea that science is this, it's really just a power tool of the elite to oppress minorities and women and anything that aren't in the in crowd. I mean, I once read where somebody once did a feminist critique of mathematics. Okay, can you imagine a feminist critique of mathematics? Please, we're not going down that road. That's getting too far. Or somebody even wrote a paper once called Toward a Feminist Algebra. I mean, please, I don't want to go that far. I don't want to get down to that extreme. But what I want to show in this series is that we don't have to automatically bow down and kowtow and surrender in every belief we have once somebody declares that science teaches it or that the science works and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, but at the same time, we don't want to go too far the other way. It's not just a bunch of happy coincidences that the work on the Manhattan Project, that they said they wanted to build a nuclear bomb, and sure enough, kaboom, they built the nuclear bomb. There's no question. Science, I believe, is telling us something about the real world. But there is an independent reality out there, regardless of how subjectively we interact with it and seek to understand it. And to say that science deals with reality, yet to say that science deals with reality doesn't make it infallible and absolutely correct in its understanding of reality. If you study the history of science, and it shows us that all through history, time and again, science has not been correct. Even when the science works, even when you can get fruitful technology from it, to build devices, travel, make predictions. And it turned out we could do that all with theories that are now tossed on the junk pile. Thus, I think we could safely assume that some of what science tells us today is correct. And that some of the science, even that science that works, is correct. But I think we could safely assume, too, that some of what the science tells us today, things that come with the imprimatur of science, even things that they say are scientifically proven, even things that science does that works, we can have all that, and yet it's very possible it could be wrong. Something we as believers need to ever keep in mind.